Hey, sleepy friends. Coming at you with another set of comic book thoughts for the comic books that I picked up this past Wednesday. Uh, I think I can bang them out before I go off to on my vacation tomorrow morning. It was kind of an odd mixed bag of comics this week. I don't know if that's because I got so many indies. I hate saying that, but I don't know. Excuse me. It was also kind of a weird day because I discovered or learned about the death of somebody that I used to be friends with, but hadn't really spoken to or heard from in well over 20 years, or a bit over 20 years. Excuse me. So, I might talk about him a little bit at the end. It doesn't have a whole lot to do with comic books, but I feel like talking about him. But to the comic books, I'll start with one that was kind of on the plus side. Letter 44. It wasn't very excited by the last two issues, and it's a $3.99 book, which is sort of my rule against $3.99 books doesn't apply to indie books. It's from Oni Press. Letter 44 by Charles Soule and Albuquerque, not by Alberto Albuquerque. And I've been disappointed by the art, and the quality of the story didn't seem that high in the last few issues. Didn't hold my attention that much, but it seemed to get a lot better in this issue, and I actually kind of liked the art in some of the outer space scenes. It seemed like the artist was working harder there, or more excited, or more inspired by some of these scenes. It had almost an updated EC Comics kind of feel to it. EC Comics meets 90s art, maybe. The art in the everyday mundane world back on Earth was still pretty weak, pretty uninspiring. But the story overall was kind of fun and interesting and made me want to buy the next issue. So I think I'll stick with this for now. One of the few $3.99 books on my list, because it's an indie. I can accept the $3.99, I guess. Although even in the world of indies, the $3.99 means it's on a shorter leash. Really good book. Okay, these aren't in any particular order, I guess. Another great issue of Wonder Woman, with great Cliff Chiang art. Lots of stuff coming to a head. Lots of characters being pulled together. Every beat of the story seems to be done just right. Can't wait for the next issue, except that I'm dreading that supposedly this is coming to an end, this Brian Azzarello, Cliff Chiang era of Wonder Woman. And the big question on the minds of those of us who love Wonder Woman is, who's really going to take it over? Is it really going to be David Finch and his wife? And whoever takes it over, will they kind of continue to play with what Azzarello has set up, or will they kind of set Wonder Woman back to the more standard superhero? I think it was when I was listening to Matt, who I still want to call Agent 42Q, but Matt of Wednesday Serial fame. He, when he was talking about it, somehow something clicked in my head, and I thought that I've always thought that this reminds me of Neil Gaiman, but then it's also reminding me of when Frank Miller took over Daredevil. He redefined Daredevil. He made Daredevil into from just kind of a minor sort of comic you'd read when you couldn't get enough Spider-Man to something, really unique and powerful and exciting. And it feels to me like that's what Brian Azzarello's done. He's taken this very a hero that's been around for a really long time, and just reimagined her in a way that, for me, really sticks. Like the Frank Miller reimagining of Daredevil really stuck, and for decades afterwards, everyone worked with what he had done to Daredevil. And although right now I guess Mark Waid's strayed further away from that Frank Miller Daredevil, he's still at play with Matt Murdock as pictured by Frank Miller. So I'm hoping that's the case with Wonder Woman, that this is a reimagining of Wonder Woman that would stick, and other people would have to play with what Azzarello's done rather than ignore what Azzarello's done. I picked up Batman and I jumped back on to Batman and, as I think of it, Batman and Robin, Batman and Aquaman, The Hunt for Robin. And this was a cool issue. It was the art. Patrick Gleason, as a lot of people say, is just turning into, one of those really fun, cool artists to watch at work. But it's a wild and woolly, crazy story, with a huge scene of fighting all of these flawed, revived Damians. I feel like it'd be kind of a spoiler showing the picture. It's very gruesome. It reminds me of how Gleason and Tomasi managed to make the Joker even more gruesome than Scott Snyder did. So anyway, it's just this wild kind of gruesome. Gruesome's the wrong word, because it's most of that stuff is off screen, so to speak. But it's just a crazy, crazy story. I think I will continue. I think the next issue will be Batman and Wonder Woman. It was a lot of fun. It's not. I don't know. I don't entirely take it seriously, if that makes sense. Very serious was Lazarus. What is this now? Issue 7. And we're getting deeper into... We're following two story threads. One is these group of the Waste who are trying to travel to... They're trying to travel to Denver. They're trying to travel to some major city where they can apply to be serfs of the family. And the Carlyles. And then the other track is we're following a continuing investigation that Forever Carlyle's doing. There's no, in this issue, there's no mentioning of her possible doubts about her relationship with her family. I felt a little bit of confusion during a big fight scene where some people got killed, and I couldn't tell who was who and what was what. But it was still kind of a compelling fight scene. Love the art and the coloring throughout this. It's grim stuff. We've had hints that Forever feels a little bad about how they treat other people. But she's so stoic, it's hard to tell if that's a growing feeling in her at the moment or not. So anyway, I'm still enjoying Lazarus, but I kind of want to see some more growth in Forever, because I feel that's what I was set up for in the first 3 or 4 issues, and now that's been put on hold a bit. But that's just complaining to complain. It's a good book. Depressing, but good. Okay, here's one of the big disappointments of the week. I thought that this finale of Animal Man was a total cop-out, particularly because there was zero addressing of one of the huge dangling plot threads, which is that of the cosmic force for the animal life that wanted and made Buddy Baker promise that he would come back and take his place as the cosmic Animal Man and leave his family and leave humanity behind. and they interrupted the previous storyline for a whole issue or more to introduce that. And so it's a total cop-out. If he wasn't going to follow up on this, why throw it in there? He's going to follow up in it in some, future Justice League issue. That just seems like a total cop-out, if he even does that. And I was kind of looking forward to Lemire doing his own version of Animal Man, and what he did is he drew, I guess what one would take as the picture book illustrations to the not very interesting story that Little Wing tells Buddy Baker, that his daughter tells him. I love the Travel Foreman art. It was great to see him back on Animal Man. But there was nothing in the children's story told by the child. There was no extra layer to it or anything. It merely served as kind of a sentimental, everything's going to be all right now, Daddy kind of thing. And it seemed uninspired and forced and unimpressive to me. And I feel like I can't trust Jeff Lemire, and I dropped Green Arrow because I was feeling like he was getting really sloppy, and since then I've heard that there's a really great arc going on, but I still don't trust him to follow through on all these things. I think maybe he's taking on too much, doing too many things at DC, and maybe not being able to fulfill his promise to readers on many of them. We'll see with the final issue of Trillium whether he can pull that one out of the drain that it seems to be going down. So anyway, yeah, I'm not expressing myself very well. Minutia Minute talked about this very cogently, but I think he was too gentle on it. I think it was a real load of horse shit. Five Ghosts was very odd because it skips, and we eventually learn that it skipped forward in time a bit after the events that would have happened right after last issue, and we're in some kind of Dreamstone kind of influenced situation, and we've got this woman version of Sinbad. It was interesting once you sort of got your bearings, and then it was over. Still love the art. The art, I may have said this before, but the art seems to me just like what you could imagine, kind of those, some John Buscema pencils as loose breakdowns, which were then inked by Klaus Janson. That's what it looks to me like. I think there might have been issues of Wolverine like that. So it's still kind of a fun comic book, but in a very loose, it's not hanging together a lot at the moment. It could all come together later. So yeah, it was okay. Sex Criminals kind of continues in the direction I was afraid it was continuing in, which is a little bit all over the place and a little bit, I don't know. Great art though. Love the art. There's kind of it's somewhere in this issue, because we had the events of last issue where they get captured by these sex police, you might say, and then we flash back and we discover, this is a little bit of a spoiler about this issue, we discover that they were warned not to commit this crime by one of the sex police who let them know that she could do the same thing they can do. And then they go ahead and do the crime, and then the sex police come in. So I guess you could say it's clever to show their actions in a new light. It makes the characters seem even more foolish and crazy. But I felt kind of let down to have it go back and kind of, it just felt like they were changing the meaning of things in a way that just didn't do a whole lot for me. But yeah, the art is great. I'll probably keep getting a few more issues because I'm enjoying the art so much. It seems like every comic put out by Image is done on different paper, and Sex Criminals is weird because the cover stock is very thin, and you can actually there's no backlight here. I can see through here from the light from the computer, the print from the other side. It's very thin paper on the cover, but not so thin on the inside, so that's kind of strange. And with it being white, it's almost kind of this absorbent paper. I can feel it absorbing the moisture from my fingers. So I don't know what that's about. Anyway. So, and another really weird comic is Undertow. It just has a really weird way of telling its story. I mean, if you kind of focus and concentrate, you can start picking up on where you are, who and where, but it takes quite a bit of concentration. And the story doesn't move along in a easy rhythm. The art's really great, and it's mostly in the coloring. I think if you just looked at the black and white art, it would be kind of confusing, or kind of just ugly. But it becomes beautiful with the coloring, and it is colored by the artist. So it's all, the color and the art is all part of one package. So it's definitely an interesting, unique story, and I don't have any feeling of emotional connection to any of it yet, and I'm just hanging on in terms of understanding what's going on. And yet I'll be getting a few more issues because of the uniqueness, because of I like the art, and I'm just curious. And another odd one, Sovereign, which is written by Chris Robertson and drawn by Paul Mayberry. And it's interesting. It's not compelling. I mean, look at that cover. It's not even it's a very confusing cover with what a weird layout. And I think it's basically 4 different pictures arranged in an odd setup there. Although this is kind of cool as I look at it. On this side is a guy shooting an arrow, and on this side is the arrow coming towards his enemies. So what we had here is some kind of fantasy world, very immersive fantasy world, not at all connected to our own. And we follow 3 different groups of people from 3 different countries. They seem to be far removed from each other geographically so far. And I think that Robertson has stated that this is going to be like one of those big fantasy novels, the kind like Game of Thrones, or I think of them as going back to Dune, even though that was a science fiction novel, but evolved into this big fat fantasy genre. That's what I think of it, the big fat fantasy book, where you have a huge cast and you follow lots of different people in different chapters, and it takes a long time to learn how they're all connected and for the large tapestry of the story to become apparent to you. Here's another one of them. I don't own too many of them, but I feel like I've read a lot of them in the past. Those are the 2 I could find. So my problem, 2 problems is, one, because we had the beginning of 3 stories in this issue, I didn't really relate to any of the characters in any of the 3. The closest I got was the kind of foppish intellectual character because he was keeping a diary. So I got to know him quite a bit better than any of the other characters. But he's he's a purposefully weak kind of character. But the art really didn't capture at all the feeling of a deeply immersive fantasy novel, because it didn't have a lot of backgrounds, and it was always sort of bathed in these dark, muted colors, which does not at all bring forth my sense of wonder. And it also is just in this style where it's not always super clear what's going on. So I think it may be the case of an artist. He has an interesting style, and it definitely has, a non-mainstream, possibly European kind of look to it. But it often is just kind of lacking in detail and lacking in real specific storytelling. I mean, I guess that's a forest in the background. And it seems like when you're off in a big fantasy world, you want an artist who's going to really help you build that world. On the other hand, you could say it was a brave choice to choose a non-standard kind of artist to give your book a very unique feeling. There's this bizarre scene where some kind of sea monster is attacking the ship, but it's hard to tell where the ship ends and the water and the sea monster begins, and they talk about cutting at its throat, but all we see is just these kind of giant lumps and a huge crowd of people. Like, how many people are on this ship, and how big is this ship? It was just a very odd scene. Yeah. It's an odd comic book. So possibly my favorite comic book of the week was the only Marvel comic book I bought. And it's slightly quirky and indie looking also, art-wise, although the cover's very mainstream looking. Ms. Marvel. It was a really nice follow-up. This issue 2 just built up even more strong, built on the strengths of issue 1 and continued to get even stronger, I thought. So I'm really interested in following this character further and seeing what's going to happen to her. The artwork that kind of evokes children's storybooks, I'm just liking more and more. Another artist who's working with color as more than she's working with lines. But really, when you adjust from the fact that it's not going to be a superhero-looking book like the cover, really enjoyable art. and really well done characterization. If I had to quibble at all, I kind of liked the character of the father in the first issue, but he is drawn to look so kind of absurd. I understand that he's kind of gotten fat from his American desk job and everything, but it's just kind of he just looks so uncomfortable. Anyway, that's not really a criticism of the book. I love the way they're showing us her powers so far. I think she's just a shapeshifter who can both change how she looks and parts of her body or her entire size. And she even shrinks down to the size of an insect in one scene. And in each scene, she kind of changes her costume and her hair, sort of unconsciously, which is it's just really done well. It's really good. Can't wait, actually, till my daughter's a little older and she can read these issues. So that was my comic book week. I've gone on pretty long, but I'm just going to mention quickly the death of the author L Shepard, who was essentially a science fiction writer. Most of what he wrote probably would be science fantasy. Maybe it's fantasy, maybe there's some kind of science behind it, but he's not too worried about that. And he mostly wrote novellas and novelettes and short stories, and a few novels. And he was my teacher. Excuse me. He was one of my teachers at a 6-week writer's workshop I went to when I was 25. And we became pretty friendly from that. And I, for several years afterwards, would hang out with him in various places. And he introduced me to editors and other writers. And he was really supportive and a little bit of a mentor father figure, maybe, or in my mind, probably not in his at all. And he was quite a larger than life character. It's hard to know exactly how much of his self-made myth was true, how many enormous amounts of drugs and alcohol he had ingested, and how many dangerous situations he had bravely ventured into in exotic parts of the world. And I'm sure some of it was true and some of it wasn't. And he was a great writer. He was a really brilliant writer. But he never made, beyond kind of the inner circle, he was kind of a writer's writer in the world of science fiction. In the part of science fiction that wanted science fiction to be very literary. And I kind of lost track of him because I didn't end up pursuing writing in the way that I thought I would, in the way that he was being my mentor for. So I kept thinking I would get back in touch with him when I got back on top of writing literary short fiction. But that just sort of never became something that I spent enough time on. And so I let it go. And today I read in CBR of all places, because he published a few comic books, that he had died at the age of 66. This is my favorite book of his. I've lost the dust jacket, The Jaguar Hunter. It's got some cool illustrations in it by J.K. Potter. So yeah, it's kind of weird. I sensed that, rightly or wrongly, but probably rightly, that he was going to be disappointed if I didn't, that I didn't really push ahead with my fiction writing career. But when I first knew him, it seemed like he was already kind of a star of short fiction in science fiction. He'd just won the Nebula Award, and he'd already won the Best New Writer Award several years before that. And his second novel had come out, and it was reviewed in the Wall Street Journal, and it supposedly was optioned by I'm blanking out on the name of the director of Titanic. Supposedly optioned by that guy. And there was a period where whenever you would see him, he seemed to just pull wads of cash out of his pockets. Anyway, but then that whole thing didn't gel. I don't know if he couldn't write more novels or what was going on, but he just kept writing the novellas and writing shorter fiction, which just doesn't have a big market. So writing for sort of a small group of aficionados of his stuff. If I could compare his writing to an artist, I'd probably compare it to Bernie Wrightson. It was very rich and something you would want to savor and really enjoy, but also that came from the dark Gothic side of things. Had an old-fashioned feeling to it. so this is the comic book that he did for Helix Comics. I don't think it was too successful. I think it lasted 11 or 17 issues, something like that. I have all the issues somewhere. But it was a fascinating concept of this endless city in some other dimension, that a city that just went on forever, called Vermilion. I think, he probably tossed it out there hoping it might become like Sandman or something, which of course it didn't. So that's one of those weird things in life as you get older and people die. So I just felt like talking about that a little bit. I hope you're all well, and I will probably get my comic books late next week, but eventually make a video about them. And when I get a chance, after I get back from my vacation, probably I'll be watching all your videos. Bye-bye.